is our current year in Gamlingay Village College? If it was to go up now, does anybody know how much that head count is?
It's about 44 in year 6 at GVC.
So that does cover.
So so if you did the maths on what I've just been saying, that you can see why it's reasonable of governors and trustees at least to engage properly in a conversation saying, look, in principle, this is possible and it could properly happen.
Thank you. Not all of those 44 at GVC are Gamlingay children.
No.
And within this school, the number we admit to each year group is 48.
Okay.
So that's the maximum we could take in each year group currently.
Yes.
Just to sort of close out the points that you've been making just there, and Amy's just said, well, if you were to take on Gamlingay First School and the Academy and then you took us on as part of the trust, if you do that, you're basically saying we will take on all of your children, regardless of capacity or not. We'll have to make room.
Yep. I think you're right. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, clearly the notion of having a catchment area with named feeder schools and not being able to accommodate them is a nonsense. So absolutely, I hope that from everything that we know, making it clear that that's a very reasonable thing to be saying, given the numbers, and what we're saying is 70 odd in current year 7 have come from out of catchments. You know, you could add therefore 70 in catchment and still not have any impact on current catchment and still operate within the admission numbers as they are now. If the world develops in a way that none of us have even got, you know, even the gurus on South Cambridgeshire District Council don't yet know of further planning, well, you might have to accommodate whatever you had to. You know, Comberton Village College has been pretty used to that because it expanded its admission number quite a number of times and worked out how to grow as Cambs was growing. So these things do happen if they had to happen. In a sense, there's a bit of a case study there with the governors there. They did what they had to do to honour their commitment to their catchment at the time. So that would have to be what's here. From everything we know at the moment, there will be no need to do anything in terms of developing capacity to accommodate everything that's known now and indeed into the future.
Right, I'll take one from my list then. I'm going to ask Mrs. Desborough. So we had, of the many questions submitted, where and how will the extra classes be housed in the first school, if you go to years, including years 5 and 6?
So the local authority have already come out to the first school when Mr Newman was still in post, and they undertook a space and capacity audit which looked at the existing premises to see if it was deemed fit to be able to house more children. The audit was carried out and we do have space, existing space, that means we can extend our age range in the current premises with a view to, in the future, then having further development on the school site. Okay.
They were much more forthcoming this afternoon. There was learning, I had to shut them up. Yes, please.
I've got a question for Mr. Gray. In your governance handbook, there is a mark about every effort should be made to ensure the school's ethos promotes all the fundamental British values of the democracy. According to your website, you have had 100 parents filling in the forms with your questionnaire. 74% have voted for the consultation. The party against it has got over 300 people which are against the consultation, so that's twice the amount of people which are for. How are you going to deal with this matter in the future? Because at the end, the governing body, as far as I understand the handbook, is the only body who can authorize the consultation, means we go and we as parents against it, and the village has no other possibility than just accept your decision.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm just for the last part there. I think there's always opportunities and other options available to the village, regardless of what happens here. The premise that we put out a questionnaire asking, we've had a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of information from parents and from staff and from people in Gamlingay and beyond over the last 3, 4, 5 years saying what is the education pathways in Gamlingay for our children. It's a very unique situation. We have a 3-tier system, and the question is everybody happy with that? And the feeling and the feedback that we're getting as governors is that many parents are not very satisfied with the lack of choice that they have, where they have to go through the 3-tier system and not be able to send their children on paid-for transport, for example, to a 2-tier system. Okay? Because of that feedback, as governors, we then have to respond to that feedback. Okay? So we are obviously always caring about the children at the school itself, and it's always those children that are there at that school. We can't talk for people that have not actually been born yet. We can't talk for people that have not moved to the village yet, for example.
No, fair enough, but my question to the point is, on the moment you make a decision, can we appeal against a decision?
There's no decisions been made yet. And also that
Once you make a decision, can we appeal against your decision?
You can't.
We can't.
You can't. There's no.
Can I just be clear? Can I be clear? There are 2 proposals here. The first one is to extend the age and become a primary school. Okay. There is no statutory reason that we actually have to hold a consultation related to that.
I know that. I've written the handbook.
Right.
So
the only proposal of the 2 which has a statutory requirement is the one to become an academy. Okay. So, as governors, we have put 2 proposals out together because, of course, they are linked. If we do extend to become a primary school, then it makes sense that we'd have to have a secondary school which is the feed, and hence the suggestion to actually academise with Comberton.
fair enough. I absolutely do appreciate the fact that every parent should have the choice for their children. I also appreciate the fact that for the moment, people who want to go in the 2-tier system have no opportunity for paid transport because they have to pay them for themselves. But on the moment where you make the decision that the GFS is going to be a primary school, you're going to take away the decision for the parents who are against it, because Stratton has already made it clear that GFC is going to be closed. So that means as of next year, we have a cap of one daughter in year 4, he's got one son at GVC, he has another year to go.
Okay.
On the moment where Stratton decides to close GVC, we have got a cap. I have no choice than send my children to the gentleman's school. With all respect,
We're
nothing
keep it
about
to questions.
education.
We're trying to
So
respond.
say one
Can I just,
question each, thank you. If you just make a quick response to that, please.
Okay. A decision hasn't been made yet, and the decision we've made by people in this room, based on their responses and based on the governor's view of those responses, and of course all responses from the wider community. Okay, it's that simple. Also, we cannot speak for, as Bridget mentioned, as Councillor Smith mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we cannot talk about anything that SET or GBC are going to do. This is a consultation purely about the first school, and that's the main responsibility of the governors.
Well,
I'm going to have to stop you now and go on to somebody else if you don't mind, otherwise it's not fair. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
I'd like to pick up on the point about paid for transport.
Yes.
What guarantees do we get that this will be a long-term solution? Because I understand that the current provision is for £333 per term per child.
Do you want to take that in the first place and then I'll add something to it?
I mean, at the moment, obviously, anyone who wishes to attend Comberton Village College, or indeed another school that's not in the main catchment area, if there are spaces available, they can exercise that choice, but the local authority has no responsibility to provide home school transport. So that would be why any parents from here, or indeed numbers of other villages that wanted to come, for example, to Comberton Village College, got a place, they have to be responsible for sorting out transport. There is a bus that's organised at the moment because parents have approached us and said, can we work out and put a bus on that would pick up in various places. Obviously that's got to cover its own costs because there's no mechanism for any funding coming in, so it's an out-of-catchment arrangement. What would have to happen through the process then that would potentially confirm that a school that went up to year 6 that needed a secondary school to feed into, you'd have to go through the process of confirming the catchment school for the effectively what would be deemed to be a new primary school. It would obviously need a catchment school, and the local authority, county council, have a statutory responsibility to ensure that appropriate transport is provided. The general ruling is more than 3 miles away to named secondary school, then free transport is provided. Now that's the general system that exists. I'm not a county councillor, so I can't sort of sign anything away on that front, but that's the system that works. And if this school were to become a primary school, which is effectively the process, it's got to have a feeder secondary school, and the local authority are involved in that process. It would go through their appropriate processes. We'd make sure that it did, and it'd be appropriate to do it separately from that, about joining, effectively forming, for the first time, a part of a catchment area, and then that's when the rulings about homeschool transport would apply at that point. Now, I'm not a county councillor, and I can't say anything beyond that, but that's the system, as I think any of us understand the system, and therefore what would need to take place in order to complete the whole process.
So can I just clarify then, there's no guarantee that paid for transport will exist in the future?
Well, if I could pick that up. So Councillor Kinsley, who's the county councillor, and myself are working very hard to ensure that there would be proper school transport in place, because none of it makes sense without it. The complication is that we realise that there will, for a number of years, be a requirement, because there are currently children from Gamlingay at Stratton who will obviously continue to go to Stratton, so there will be a requirement for a number of years for buses, 2 buses, one to go to Biggleswade, one to go to Comberton. So, you know, that is the slight complication. Now, in order to try and precipitate a positive response from the County Council about that, we've identified a sum of money which is currently allocated for Gamlingay for community transport, which could potentially be offered to the County Council to subsidise those 2 buses. And that will certainly carry a lot of weight with county councils. It's not often that communities actually offer them quite substantial sums of money. And this is some money coming from the Station Road development. So, you know, we do have quite a lot of leverage there to ensure that the transport needs of all our children are met, you know, through this, what is essentially a transition period. So, you know, we are getting nothing to contraindicate at the moment that transport will be provided. So, okay, so do you want to add?
The transport will not.
No, there's there's everything, all the indications are that the transport will be provided as a matter of course. So, but I haven't got any signed off dotted line. Do you mind if I take other people and come back to you? All right? Yes.
Will it be, you're going to provide transport from 2018 when children reach that right age?
Yes, it will be. Sorry, do you want to take that because it's not catchment?
I think if you fed through in the way that's being suggested, and again, my understanding of the proposal is potentially year 5 children, 2016 could potentially start here, they would become year 6 in 2017, and obviously with 2-tier secondary education it's at year 7, and that would take you through to September 2018.
Child in year 6 at the moment, and if we were to send him to Comberton, we would want to send him from year 7, which is September next year. Am I right to think there will be no transport available?
Under current proposals, you're right. This is something that's been brought to the governors in the other meeting, and could, I think, they were minded to pursue what you're talking about for those sorts of reasons.
So this is what I mentioned at the outset, that this afternoon's meeting did highlight an appetite amongst parents for the governors to look into the opportunity for the village to go into catchment earlier than that 2017. So, you know, we've got no answer on that because that's just come back now. So the governors will think about that, work that up, ask some questions, and there will be something on the FAQs, I believe, yes, as soon as there's something to say. All right? Okay, anybody not asked a question? Yes.
Okay, thank you. In your recent interim Ofsted report, it suggested that, well, it actually states that liaising with primary schools is best developed and best practice is not evident. How would you hope to improve those links with this as your feeder pump, so given the distance and travelling of your specialist staff and professionals over on this side, rather than cascading it, development training? Do you want to have those links with this?
Yeah, no, and I think so. it's a good question. I think it's potentially a really good opportunity, and I know governors and the head here see that as quite an important positive opportunity to forge links between different phases as well. And absolutely, the trust itself would, for that sort of reason, very much welcome having a primary phase school within the trust as well, because, say, the professional development, the learning that can go on with that, the possibilities of using staff from both phases to inform each other, so both perhaps some specialist staff, whether that be, think of obviously examples, science teachers, modern foreign languages teachers and others contributing to education that might take place here, for example, and equally those who've been teaching children here, particularly perhaps in the upper years here, coming and working with teachers who are teaching Year 7, particularly at secondary phase, and advising about the curriculum, even potentially being involved in some of that teaching as appropriate. That seems to me a really exciting possibility, and one that's very, very good for young people's education. It's probably a shame in this country that more of that doesn't go on, and if there were a much better seamless transition with staff actually working across each other's phases, I think we'd see a better education system, certainly a better transition between schools, which can be an issue for youngsters. So those are absolutely the sort of things that I think would be a really good opportunity, and we'd want to see at both schools. And I think it's good. It's a reason why there's mutual benefit potentially. Got to work on it, make it work properly and get it right, but why there is mutual benefit in the sort of development that could happen.
But currently, Comberton Academy Trust doesn't have that experience of working with other primaries, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. It has, yes, it absolutely has some, but the difference would be you're actually part of the same organisation, so it's a much stronger arrangement, and ultimately you can employ people, for example, with the trust. So if you wanted to, you could employ people to work in more than just one school. So there might be someone who worked perhaps most of the time at secondary school, part of the time at primary phase school, or vice versa. Now at the moment you haven't got an employment means of doing that, because each of the different schools are their own separate employers. So you try and work together, you collaborate, you compare notes, but this takes things to a different level and allows you, by mutual arrangement and agreement, to see yourself really genuinely as one bigger organisation where it's appropriate to do that, including if you want to, and there are appropriate people who work in more than one of the organisations while still being employed by the same trust. So I think what it does potentially do is take things to another level beyond what you can do without that sort of arrangement.
I'd just like to extend that really good question to Mrs. Desborough, because I've got some questions about, does this school currently have the expertise in it to cater for Year 5 and 6 children?
Absolutely. So looking at the staff that we currently have at the school, we have 12 members of staff that are all qualified in primary age through full primary. 4 of our staff are specialists in the early years. 8 of our staff are Key Stage 1 and 2 specialism, and 7 of our staff have experience of teaching Year 5-6. Of those staff, that does include myself, who has taught Year 6 previously for 7 years, and although I obviously won't be taking a class, I'm leading teaching and learning, and therefore have that experience to be able to help support the teachers in future. Also, if we were to extend our age range, we would probably have to employ new teaching staff, and therefore when we are recruiting, we are always looking at where we have the need. And if we feel that there is a need, there is a gap, we would employ someone specifically with 5-6 experience, so to ensure that we do have that experience right the way through.
Yes.
If Gamlingay First School doesn't take this opportunity at this time and become a primary school or become part of the trust, is the 3-tier system in Bedfordshire actually stable, or might be forced into a decision in the future when we've not got anything on the table?
Right, thank you. Now, we had that question earlier, and actually I deferred to Mrs. Mingay because she's been doing quite a lot of work on this, so I'd like her to answer that
For
question.
those of you that don't know me, I've been a governor at the school for nearly 10 years. I was the chair of governors through the last 2 Ofsteds. In terms of Bedfordshire, obviously there are different regions within Bedfordshire. You've got Central Bedfordshire, you've got Bedford Borough. Bedford Borough themselves are in the process of changing their schools from a 3-tier system to a 2-tier system. I do believe there is a letter on the, is it on the website, the letter? That you can have a look, which confirms that over the next few years they are working with all their schools to change from the 3-tier system to the 2-tier system. If you look at the Central Bedfordshire admissions pages on the website, you will see that they also have parts of their authority that are changing from 2-tier to 3-tier. If you look around the Dunstable area in particular,
3-tier to 2.
Sorry, 3-tier to 2-tier. Around the Dunstable area, they are closing some middle schools, changing to 2-tier schools. So it's the view of the governing body that obviously the educational landscape around where we are is changing anyway. We firmly believe that change will come, and that also includes the ability of schools to stay as maintained schools rather than becoming academies, hence the consultation about becoming an academy. We believe that we would rather be masters of our own destiny, to be able to have the opportunity to choose which school we would want to feed into, rather than sitting back, waiting to see what happens, carrying on as we are, continuing to lose pupils to the 2-tier system, and then by the time we find potentially the landscape around us in Bedfordshire has changed and we have no choice to become a 2-tier system, that actually the schools that in an ideal world we would have wanted to feed into and become part of, those choices no longer exist for us because they don't have the space, the capacity to take on another school. So that is a key part of our decision, and one of the reasons for entering into that consultation now, rather than waiting until that decision is taken away from us. We would rather have the choice and have the path to an outstanding level of education.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Okay. Next question, please. Yes.
Pleased to hear the talking of changing the catchment, etc. Certainly in my circumstances, I've got 2 at the school at the moment, the first school, so I'm doing my bit to keep the funds coming in. The third, we've just started year 5 at the college. My personal preference is to have all 3 together. Is there any scope in those early days of proposal, etc., for year 5 potentially come back to year 6